When terrestrialization was revealed, one of the first things people thought of was Shedinja. If Shedinja were to carry an air balloon and terrestrialize into an electric type, it would be immune to all direct damage. Thankfully, Game Freak had the foresight to exclude Shedinja from Gen 9, as otherwise it would have been absurdly centralizing and an obnoxious Pokemon to deal with.
Nope.
Although this theoretical Shedinja would be immune to direct damage, it would still be vulnerable to things like Sand, Status, and Mold Breaker. That got me wondering about how close you can make a Pokemon to being totally invulnerable. But before I get into this, let me please put out a disclaimer. This is an exploration of what is theoretically possible, not something that is at all practical. That being said, let's try to make a Pokemon. Alright, so the first step to creating my ultimate wall is identifying candidates, of which I have 3. These candidates are Arcanine, Typhlosion, and Smeargle. The one trait these 3 all have in common is that they can all become typeless. They can do this by using the move Burn Up, which removes the user's fire typing. As mono fire types, Typhlosion and Arcanine become typeless after using Burn Up. As for Smeargle, it has to first use Conversion to become a fire type and then use Burn Up. But what's the point of becoming typeless? Well, if we could give a typeless Pokemon Wonder Guard, then that Pokemon would be totally immune to all direct damage without the need of an item or terrestrialization. This then begs the question, how do you give one of our 3 typeless candidates Wonder Guard? After all, moves like Roleplay, Skill Swap, and Entrainment all fail when used on Shedinja, whom we want to steal Wonder Guard from. There's only one way to transfer Wonder Guard, which is the ability Trace. However, this requires getting Trace onto one of our 3 candidates, which is a little tricky since Trace usually activates immediately. To bypass this, we'll be starting out with 2 opposing Pokemon with abilities that can't be copied by Trace. There are a bunch of Pokemon to fit the bill, so I'll just go to Arceus in Cast Form. As for our Trace user, I'll be using Gardevoir since it gets Skill Swap and Thunder Wave. Now when Gardevoir gets sent out against Arceus in Cast Form, Trace won't activate and we'll be able to Skill Swap it onto our Smeargle. Then when Shedinja is set out opposite of Smeargle, Trace will activate and copy Wonder Guard. So now that I have a frame for the main setup, let's look at what else I can do to make my Smeargle immune to even more stuff. To start out, I'll be using a Blossom so I can Baton Pass Ingrain to Smeargle. This will make it immune to phasing moves and give it passive recovery to counteract Sand Chip. I'll also be using Quiver Dances to pass its speed boost so that Smeargle can have a fast Crafty Shield, which temporarily shields the side of the field from status moves. I'll also be paralyzing Smeargle with Gardevoir when it switches in so that it can't be burned or poisoned. However, there's still one glaring weakness in my setup, which is Mold Breaker, as well as moves with Mold Breaker effects like Sunsteel Strike. To fix this, I'll be giving Smeargle an Ability Shield, which will prevent Mold Breaker from bypassing Wonder Guard. However, I have to do this after I Skill Swap Trace onto it, since Ability Shield would prevent Skill Swap from working at all. To do that, I'll just use a teammate to trick the Ability Shield onto Smeargle while it's setting up the Conversion and Burn Up. Finally, I'll be using Substitute on Smeargle to give it immunity to status moves like Leech Seed, Confuse Ray, and Trick. With all of this, I believe this is the closest a Pokemon can get to total invulnerability, so let's see the whole process in action. Alright, so here's our setup. We are of course starting out on the opposite side, which is Cast Form and Arceus, because neither Forecast or Multi-Type can be copied by Trace. So you can see Gardevoir has Trace, but it's just kind of sitting and waiting. And so we'll be using Blossom here to Ingrain and Quiver Dance up. And while Blossom is setting up to the max, the other 3 are just wasting time, so just using moves that don't do anything else. And the reason we're using Smeargle over Typhlosion and Arcanine is because Smeargle is just easier to do the setup, because it can use Crafty Shield by itself. We could still do the whole same setup with Arcanine and Typhlosion, it would just be a bit more complicated, because those 2 Pokemon would first have to use Mimic to copy Crafty Shield onto that move slot, and which means we would need like another Pokemon just for them to copy the Crafty Shield from. So Smeargle is just a little easier to do this whole setup with, a little less complex. So now that our Blossom is fully boosted up, we are ready to switch into our Smeargle. So Gardevoir is going to use Thunder Wave into that Blossom swap, so we get Smeargle paralyzed. So no more burn or poison as possible. Smeargle is now ready to go. So first we'll use Conversion to make it a fire type, because Burn Up is our first move slot. So Conversion will target that, make us a fire type. And now that we're a fire type, we can set out Shedinja, who will give us our Wonder Guard. We'll burn it up and destroy it. Shedinja has done his job, and now Smeargle is a typeless Pokemon with Wonder Guard. And Grimmsnarl here is just here to trick it with Prankster, because theoretically Smeargle would just outspeed anything else. So we need Prankster Trick. As you can see, it gets paralyzed, so it doesn't matter anyway. but there's still a reason for Grimmsnarl to be used here. And now that we have Substitute, as you can see, Dragonclaw, Moongeist Beam, nothing's working, Roar doesn't work, and yeah, we're now set up. Now, I've made a point of mentioning that this Smeargle is almost invulnerable, so what can still hit it? Well, there's actually still one way to deal direct damage and break Smeargle's Substitute, Struggle. Struggle deals typeless damage that ignores Wonder Guard, so there's no way to block that. Curse can also hit Smeargle since it bypasses Substitute, although it can't be temporarily blocked by Crafty Shield. The ultimate way to destroy this set is with Perish Song, which also bypasses Substitute and cannot be blocked by Crafty Shield. Smeargle is also vulnerable to certain moves used by Pokemon with Infiltrator, such as Leech Seed and Trick when Crafty Shield isn't in effect. But given how specific and niche the counters to my setup are, I'd say this Smeargle is basically... well, that's as close as I can think of to make a truly invincible Pokemon. If there's any setup or ways to break through that I didn't think of, let me know in the comments. I wouldn't be surprised if I missed something given how deep this kind of stuff runs. Anyways, that's all I have for today, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.